Hey everyone, this is John.
Hey, this is Hector.
And what are we doing here? What are we up to?
We tend to do this a lot where it's just us talking.
Right?
And just having these apparently hour conversations about comics.
Uh-huh.
And we get people who get interested in what we're talking about. And then we have to stop our conversation and explain stuff. And maybe this is something we can just do. It's just, let's record our conversations and then just
Why not?
let people. Why not? Let people listen.
If people are that interested, well, we're about to find out how interested people are, actually. So,
We're going to see all those comments. These people are pricks. These douchebags think they know.
well, actually.
Well, actually, as I move my glasses. All right.
So yeah, we're going to talk about comics. This show, we're going to do some discussions about the character Cyclops. We're not necessarily going to do shows where we talk about specific characters every single time. We might talk about events. We might talk about storylines. But what we will do before we kick things off is let's just give a little bit of history about ourselves and how we got into comics. I got into comics like 8 months ago. I just started. And it was right after we saw X-Men Apocalypse. And I was like, well, maybe I want to try to read some X-Men stuff. And then you were like, oh, we'll start here and read this and read that. And you just kind of became my Sherpa as I tried to figure everything out here. Because I'm doing a lot of jumping around. I started with one of the Epic collections for X-Men, so I started at the very beginning. And then I started reading the more contemporary stuff, Extraordinary X-Men and Uncanny. And I've just been hopping around everywhere in between, just trying to catch up.
Yeah, I've been reading comics my entire life for most of it. I learned how to read on comics. When I was a kid, my dad, one of the way we bonded is he would buy me comics every week. Usually X-Men or something X-Men related, just because that was just what he did. He was a mailman and used to deliver to a comic book store. So each week I would get, either Uncanny X-Men or X-Men, X-Factor, X-Force. I would get all these just random ones, and he didn't know the stories. He just picked them up. He would just go to the guy at the counter and was like, hey, what should I bring my son? And that's what he did.
Nice.
So yeah, and I've just been doing it ever since. My allowances have always gone to comic books. As an adult, I spend more money, I feel like, on comics than I do on actual food. I just get enwrapped with these characters and these storylines, and it's the way my mom feels about Days of Our Lives is the way I feel about half these titles.
These are your stories?
These are my stories. I tell them all the time, like, leave me alone, I'm reading my stories.
Nice. So for this first video, we are going to talk about the character Cyclops, present-day Scott Summers from the Earth 616 continuity, who is, of course, deceased.
Yes.
He is dead.
The thing is that as somebody who is probably part of this little bandwagon too, Cyclops is usually an X-Man that most people aren't excited about.
Right.
They really don't like him. He's kind of the Boy Scout. He had the Boy Scout personality for such a long time, that moral code. Why would you want to be a fan of Cyclops when you can be a fan of Wolverine or Gambit
or Bishop
or Storm or those more of extreme X-Men? Why him?
Because he had this always sense of duty and that moral code that you mentioned, it made him seem vanilla compared to everybody else.
And which he was. I mean, one thing is that if we go back to 63 when the title first started, we've actually had this conversation where everybody actually had a role. And his role was the leader, but he really wasn't the leader. I mean, Xavier still called the shots.
Right, and he was the deputy leader. He was the one who got to stay back in the office while everyone else went out and on vacation and saw their families.
I know.
And it's a role that I feel got dumped on him because he didn't really have anything else to do. Because you had Iceman Bobby Drake, who was the jokester, the young one. You had Beast, who was the intellectual, and Jean, sadly, the token damsel.
See, that's classic 60s Stan Lee writing, though, so all your female characters are that way then.
Right, now he's often referred to as the most powerful back in the 60s because of his optic blasts, but clearly he did not turn out to be the most powerful.
Yeah, I also feel like he was the most powerful because at that time he was the only one who had powers that were uncontrollable. He can't, even to his death, he was not able to control his optic blast. Right. He always constantly had to wear a visor. And which, to some people, especially maybe the mentality of that time, that was probably, we can't test his power set because it's too destructive,
He's a bit of a loose cannon. We don't know what's going to happen.
Let's make him the leader.
And well, he always, because of those powers, he was always a very reserved character. He was always very concerned about what he could do or how he was going to hurt other people. And you can see that with how his relationship with Jean Grey evolved from like being like even afraid for even talking to her. But I mean, Angel, Warren Worthington, was probably the better choice to be the leader because he was like this poster boy for mutants for Xavier. He was tall and dashing and a ladies' man. You know, he was kind of like this mutant perfection, whereas Scott, you don't really have anything to do. You're second in charge.
And technically, if you want to get actually like...
there it is. There's our first actually.
Yeah. Yes. And it only took how long? No, but if you think about it, Angel was the only one who had any sort of superhero experience before the X-Men.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, because he was part of he was known as the Avenging Angel in New York City.
Okay.
So prior to joining the X-Men, that's what he did.
So he does lose his spot, since we're talking about like the early 60s X-Men. He does lose his spot to Mimic when Mimic joins the team very briefly.
Mimic was just a douche.
Right. He was obnoxious and annoying. Yeah, and I'm glad he's gone.
Yes. He makes an appearance every so often, but it's just kind of like, hey, look it's Mimic. All right, let's go.
And that was also around the time, I believe, where Scott accidentally took out Warren with an optic blast. And then he got super nervous about ever using Baron. Like, kind of carried that guilt around him for a while. But, I mean, do we want to say anything else about the early 60s stuff before we move into some of the others?
Well, I mean, the way I look at 60 Scott is like, he's the leader without being the leader. Even when Xavier, quote unquote, dies, and now he has to carry the team, in actuality, he's really not doing too much of that. Like, it's kind of almost like a group consensus of the way they're doing things.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's something that they talk about a lot in Giant Size X-Men, and as you get into the 70s, how like the original X-Men always worked more as a team, whereas in Giant Size it's like, okay, well, Storm, you try something. All right, Colossus, now you try something. But before we move over into the 70s, I do want to just touch on again his infatuation with Jean. And it's something that we're going to see again and again with Cyclops, where a lot of his own identity is based on who he is dating.
That is a very, very valid statement. And it's not only part of his identity, it's also part of every single decision that he makes in his own personal life is based off of who he's with. I mean, when we jump into Madeline Pryor, look at that mess. Like, ooh.
We're going to get there. We're going to get there in a minute. So in Giant Size X-Men, which picked up, 1975?
Yeah.
He was the only team member to stay on with the X-Men after the series started back up. Jean does return to the team pretty quickly. Beast makes a few appearances here and there. Angel rejoins the team for a little bit, but is quickly gone. And Iceman you see like once. But
I mean, he had to save them from Arcade, which was a huge deal, okay?
Fucking Arcade. God, that guy's obnoxious. I can't stand him. But he does retain his position as leader, but slowly you start to see Storm act more like the leader and be the more fitting person for that role.
One thing that I really like about that whole progress of her character is that even under his leadership, she still respects it. But you could see the evolution of her becoming a leader. There is an issue where they're fighting Proteus.
Oh, yeah.
Where Scott is he's just being a dick to everybody. He starts a fight with Wolverine where it's getting all the other X-Men involved, and he's like, that was a training exercise. But in the middle of it, you have Storm just come up and say, no. No.
Yeah, like, it was one of those things where he was trying to get Wolverine to snap out of his apprehension about going against Proteus again.
Yes, because he got, like, all weirded out.
Yeah, he got all, like, twisted and Valmorphinized, if I'm going to make up a word.
He was spaghettified, like as if he was in like he was in a black hole. Like, God, I love Proteus. You just see that, he's not like losing his leadership role. He's now having people who are actually really starting to challenge him, but not really. Because you never had on the original team someone like Wolverine who was questioning every single thing that he was doing.
Right.
And on top of that, Wolverine was trying to get with his woman at the time.
Yeah, it's true. Sure.
And he didn't take that very well.
Nope. But should we get into his relationship with Jean going into the 70s, because they do they do end up together.
It's a big thing.
Yeah.
I mean, the 70s all the way up until Dark Phoenix, it was just a love story between the two of them.
Mm-hmm.
Even though let's cut that back, because we all know that wasn't really Jean, but which is a whole other mess.
That's a whole other show where we're talking about the tangled web that is Jean Grey's life.
I feel like we should have a whiteboard with dry erase markers and.
No, we need like newspaper clippings and string to put that all together. But like him and Jean are together. Their relationship grows, and then you get the events of the Dark Phoenix saga, where of course she, or a representative of her, dies.
And obviously it takes a lot out of him, because just before that, actually during I believe the Proteus storyline, they send up a reporter. They set up
Yes.
one with each other. So they are constantly in each other's minds. They know what each other's feelings. They know when the other one's coming, which was a big help during the Dark Phoenix saga, where she's coming back and he's like, I feel her. She's on her way back.
Yeah.
So
It also helps her escape from the Hellfire Club.
yes, that whole storyline also introduced somebody else in Cyclops' life, who is personally one of my favorites.
We're gonna get to her.
We're gonna get to her. She's so fantastic. Once Jean is gone, or Jean, quote unquote, he just goes through this downward spiral, which which would be natural for any character or person if they lose their significant other.
Right. And he leaves the team for a while. But the interesting thing is, when he leaves the team, he doesn't leave the comic book series.
No.
They still follow him, like, and he joins up the ship and has this brief relationship with the captain of the ship.
Lee.
Yeah, with Lee.
Who ends up going with Magneto at some point, too, which is interesting.
Yeah, you mentioned that the other day. I haven't gotten to that part yet, though. But even before, let's backtrack a little bit more. Even before the Dark Phoenix saga, you have the events in the Savage Land where they get like
separated.
They get separated because Magneto captures them all and basically has them like captured in chairs where they have no control over their bodies anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And when they're escaping, Jean and Beast are able to make it out, and the rest of the X-Men are, they presume, buried alive. They escape, and there's this months and months of issues where they don't know, like Jean and Beast and Xavier don't know that the rest of the X-Men are alive, and Xavier goes to space, and Jean goes to Muir Island, and her Phoenix powers begin to develop there. And like this whole thing would be solved if someone would answer the goddamn phone.
Because there is panels that have the phone ringing saying, hey, where is everybody?
Right.
And they're not home. They're in Japan. They're not home. They're in Canada. You know, like...
They're fighting Alpha Flight. And
Alpha Flight.
Uh-huh.
Really?
Yep.
I mean, I love Alpha Flight, but...
Hey, at least they're not Excalibur.
Oh, Lord, Excalibur. The only thing that they had for them is Nightcrawler and Kitty.
Well, yeah, for a little while. But let's face it, Excalibur is the Jubilee of the superhero teams.
Maybe we should establish our hate for Jubilee.
Yeah. Anytime something is the Jubilee of anything, it's terrible.
It pretty much. And you know, I can say that because I'm a huge Dazzler fan, so...
Okay, well, let's get into some of the Madeline Pryor stuff that you were talking about before, because Jean dies in the Dark Phoenix saga. They spend some time in space. They fight the Brood, and the whole time there's a little bit of a tug-of-war between Scott and Storm about who's really in charge. Storm did assume the leadership role while Scott was gone. When Scott was back with the team, she was like, all right, I'll defer to you, but every once in a while she's like, well, hang on a second, you're not the one really in charge here.
And you see that a lot, like, during there's a lot of storylines in that period between, I mean, that blank period where he doesn't have a companion, where just them fighting amongst each other on who is who, like who's the leader, who's the not. I mean, Storm was the one who led the charge when the Morlocks kidnapped Angel. She was the one who became one with the Akanti.
The Akanti, yeah.
So, who pretty much went in and saved them from the Brood. So, she's known for sacrificing herself over, which is something I don't believe just him as a leader would have done. I feel like just him, he would sacrifice other people at that time before it was ultimately him.
I think there is a time where he would be willing to do that, but I don't think that time is right now. We'll get to that.
Yes. That eventually comes. But yeah, the Madeline Pryor stuff is some of my favorites. Just because when you start to like and really enjoy her as a character during the Outback stuff, it just goes south really fast after that. You're like, yeah, oh.
So let's start from the beginning there. Madeline Pryor is a clone of Jean Grey, yes?
Yes, but we don't find that out until Inferno, which is like 7-8 years later down the line. We just think that she's just a look-alike. And that's what they have you believe. She never had any sort of like mutant powers or mutant energy, so to speak. So, except for that one part where Mastermind comes in, he makes them think that Madeline is going to be the new Phoenix, which she wasn't. She was still human. And that was the closest thing, because for a while, even Scott was at the time trying to question her. Like, there is one part where there's one issue, I can't even remember the issue, where she punched him in the face. Like, she full on like cold-cocked him because
it was preemptive.
Because he was like, "Are you really Jean?" And boom.
No, it was preemptive because he's about to become a huge dick.
A huge dick. All right. So the whole thing with Madeline is he finds her, they start a relationship, and let's be real, the relationship is started because she looks like her.
Yeah, it's all pretense.
Exactly. They end up getting married and having a kid. And that kid grows up to be Cable.
Mm-hmm.
But that being said, that entire marriage is pretty much a sham. Because as we find out, as we've alluded to, the Phoenix that died was not Jean. Jean ended up being at like the bottom of the Hudson Bay, and the Fantastic Four and the Avengers are the ones who find her, and they call them, and oh great, let's all start a new team with the original X-Men.
Yeah, some people at Marvel wanted the original 5 back together, and Chris Claremont's like, Jean's dead. And they're like, but what if she wasn't dead?
But she destroyed an entire universe.
But what if she didn't destroy the entire universe?
We need to talk about this. It's always kind of funny that, it was a way to give that character a clean slate. Mm-hmm. That, the sins of the past were not hers, they were somebody else's. Which is always kind of funny because they always go back to the Phoenix wanting to be part of Jean.
Yeah.
All the way up until her death. Her real one.
Right.
The current death. During this time, though, Scott just picks up and leaves.
Yeah. Jean's alive, like, a peace. Bye.
Yeah. And he leaves Madeline and Nate by themselves. And during that time also, Mr. Sinister, he decides that Madeline needs to go. And nobody knows the reason why, so she runs back off to the X-Men. Without her baby, because the baby gets kind of kidnapped-ish. So...
And no one does anything about it.
No, and that's the other thing. Nobody does. I know for a while the baby shows up in X Factor. Like, okay. Yeah, Jean...
At least they acknowledge it.
Yes, Jean and Scott actually kind of raise little Nate for a while. But it's one of those things, though. It's just... You have this character like him who's so straight-laced, very by the book. He's the Boy Scout who just drops his wife to go back to his former girlfriend.
Right.
And this is where you kind of start questioning, what kind of person he is. Like, it's that first kind of like smudge. You have now damaged him in a way that's really hard to come back from. And especially with the things that are about to happen between this little bizarre love triangle with him, Jean, and Madeline. Because Fall of Mutants happen. And during Fall of Mutants, the X-Men, quote unquote, die. They die. They actually do die. And this is where our Outback team comes in. People forget that Madeline was there. And Madeline was one of the lives that had to be taken so that they can, so that Roma can, and Forge and them can put the adversary back into his own little dimension. When they come back, they all agree, the X-Men all agree, all of them, that they have to stay dead and make sure that the world thinks that they're dead, so that they can work secretly, and that their loved ones aren't going to be attacked. One interesting part is that there is actually a panel in that where Madeline is talking into a camera, and she's telling Scott, watch our baby, I love you, I always loved you. Just because she's still, even though all this happened, she was still saying, hey, after all that's happened, let us just, don't remember me for just leaving me, pretty much, in the way I'm looking at it. But that all takes a toll when she decides that she wants to open hell on Earth. So, yeah.
Look what you did now.
Mm-hmm.
And you do have this character who is now tainted. Because, you think Jean is dead, you start dating Colleen Wing. All right.
Yes.
Jean's alive, you never see Colleen Wing again. Fine. Like, no harm done there. You thought she was dead.
Right.
Jean, Dark Phoenix dies. You start dating Lee. All right, sure.
But then...
But you leave your wife and your child because Jean's back. Come on.
Yeah.
And it's a fascinating track that this character is on, because especially once you get into the 2000s, you start seeing that downward spiral. And I compared him a lot of times to Marvel's Walter White, the character from Breaking Bad.
Yep. Yes.
Because he's a character, he started out very straight-laced, and he started doing some questionable things, and you think he had his family's best intentions at heart, much like you think Cyclops has mutants' best intentions at heart. But really, he takes this downward spiral into just being an almost straight-up villain because he likes it. Because he enjoys just being, building the empire.
Which he was. Mm-hmm. As we get later into that, when we get to, the late 2000s, early 2010s, you'll see, he's establishing a mutant army,
Yeah.
And at first it was unintentional until it became intentional.
And see, and a lot of times, I think in most cases, they walk the line very well with his character to where he's doing the things that he's doing, building his mutant army, asking children to fight wars for him, because he's backed into a corner. Because, especially in the 2000s, you're dealing with events like House of M and E for Extinction and and Schism and A versus X. Bad shit keeps happening to mutants.
And even the bigger ones, like Messiah Complex.
Yeah.
Oh, and Second Coming. You've got right there are two storylines that are just brutal, and it's a full-on attack against mutants.
Mm-hmm. Second Coming, I think, you're already starting to see Cyclops become a bit more of an authoritarian figure, to put it mildly. But you still see that he has the capacity for doing the right thing. Because at the end of that, Xavier's like, hey, you need to let this child go. You need to go let Cable raise her. Don't kill your fucking kid, Cyclops. And he's like, okay, go ahead. I won't kill you, son. So he still has the capacity to make the right decision. But he's so singularly focused on mutant survival,
right?
That he forgets to think that, hey, mutant kind is made up of people, and the individuals are just as important as the whole.
Yes, and there's actually a really awesome little panel, actually, and it was in It was during the Necrotia storyline. So it was like it was right after it. So I believe it was part of the Utopia storyline, where 3 of the mutants on Utopia were killed. And it was Namor who was like, what was the significance of these people? There was only 3. And he was like, when there's only 198 of us, 3 is a lot.
Yeah.
So you see that he still had a vision for the whole. Like, it was everybody. He's thinking about the entire mutant race.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's the difference between him and a guy like Namor, who I think it's important that he's around, because you see, like, whereas Scott Summers is a leader, Namor is a ruler.
Because Namor is a king.
Mm-hmm. And it gives you that contrast to show that even though he is on this path that seems to be heading straight down toward villainhood, there still is this rationale that he has in his mind for it.
Well, I mean, we jumped far ahead.
Sure did.
We did. Because, 90s Cyclops is all right. I mean, that's the 90s just in comics in general, there was just oversaturation. Just everything was extreme. It was the extreme 90s. So you didn't really get a lot of, in my opinion, you didn't really get a lot of really good stuff out of it. A lot of things that would actually move the story forward. It was more of like, boom, boom, boom. Yeah, look at these flashy costumes.
Aren't these characters cool?
Yeah.
Don't you just love Gambit?
Oh God, everybody loves Gambit apparently. Okay, that's another
Gambit
story.
just fine.
He gets punched around.
He sure does. He's a good. Anyway, we don't go on this digression right now. But see, the thing is, like, you get like this character development of Cyclops, which kind of culminates in the direction he's going in with when he leaves Madeline Pryor for Jean. But you still have him on all of the merchandise. He is still so synonymous with the X-Men and this group of heroes.
Well, it's because he is, in my opinion, he's he's like the ultimate X-Man. There's a lot of people who will disagree with me. They'll say no, Wolverine, no, Storm. Some people might even fight me and say Kitty, which I'll probably give you a little bit of that one. But he's always on the merchandise. He'll always be part of every single movie or just cartoon, television series. He will always have a presence. Why? Because he was on the team probably longer than everybody else. Even though he did leave for those couple of years in X Factor, once he was back, and he did not leave the team, and he came back as a leader. Because he, when we got into blue and gold teams, he actually went ahead and led one of the teams.
Yeah, and he's the straight man. He's the man who is just kind of holding it all together, and everyone else is playing off of them with all of their extreme personalities.
Right.
You need him to balance everything out.
Calm people down. Calm the hell. Wolverine, you're a little much. You're a little extra right now. I need you to bring it from a 10 to like maybe a 5.
And I'm going to say this about Kitty Pryde, the ultimate X-Man. Roller skates. Those roller
skates were everything. I think I have a thing with heroes and roller skates. Let's be real. What did I say? Who's one of my favorites?
Dazzler.
She wore roller skates. Kitty wore roller skates. She couldn't fall. She just phased right through.
She walked on air. She's so effervescent.
She is. She's like a little fairy. Love it.
So, do we want to spend a whole lot of time on anything else in the 90s here? You get to see heroes being heroes.
90s Cyclops. A lot of the stuff with Cyclops in the 90s always went back to Cable. It always went back to Cable because they were really, really trying hard to push that relationship on people. That Cable was Nathan Gray, Nathan Summers. He was Cyclops and Maddie's child, and now he's back. And they really pushed that on you. We got that with Executioner Song. The Tales of Slim and Red. There was, even during the Phalanx Covenant, there was a whole little section on how when Jean and Cable are using their psychic powers to fight Cameron and not Scott Lang, because that's Ant-Man, the other Lang. They were fighting, and they were doing a psychic battle, and they were able to reach into each other's memories, where Cable got a little confused because Jean had memories of him with them, not knowing that the people who raised him partially were the same people he was fighting them with. So they'd really tried to push hard on that, because even storylines like Onslaught, it was more like a group collective. There wasn't really one superstar on that team. I mean, granted, you had like the Avengers, Fantastic Four, they all sacrificed themselves and boom, they're gone. But you also have like on that end, you had all the X teams fighting, so nobody was really out there. Even Fatal Attractions, which was a huge crossover in the 90s also, they just didn't, he really wasn't a huge part of it. It was more of a collective thing. It was very much a Xavier versus Magneto type of storyline. He really doesn't get back, to me, in my opinion, he doesn't get interesting again until we get into the 12 storyline, where Apocalypse kidnaps the 12, which are each one is like a different mutant that he can just harness their power, so he can go ahead and transfer his consciousness or whatever into somebody else. So Scott being one of them, Jean, Xavier, it was Magneto and Polaris, Iceman and Sunfire, there was Storm, the Living Monolith was part of them. It was just the weirdest little combination of them all. And it was all because they wanted to figure out but it was just because it was like elements. Like it went very like, I don't know, I guess Egyptian.
That makes sense.
Yeah, but yeah, and then the rest of the X-Men teams had to deal with it. So, like, Mikhail Rasputin was part of it.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, he was part of the 12. And like I said, Cyclops and Polaris and all of them. Bishop was one of the 12 also, and Cable. So they all just went ahead and he kidnapped them. Apocalypse was going to switch his mind with Nate Gray, the X-Man, who was from the Age of Apocalypse timeline, who ended up, when that timeline ended, was able to come into the 616 universe. When Scott sacrifices himself and just throws himself in there, which it took a while, like I said with Storm, this is the first time you really see that with him. He merges with Apocalypse, and that has a whole bunch of consequences that go with that, as we find out in Grant Morrison's new X-Men series.
Moving into like 2001.
Yeah. Because for the first couple issues of his run, they mention it. Like, you need, like, what is it? When Wolverine and him are in the Blackbird, and they're flying out after saving
Ugly John.
Yeah. He says, Wolverine's trying to talk to him about it. And he's like, there's nothing to talk about. And I feel like that there is a lot of that transgression that gets him into doing the things he's about to do in that run.
I think he also has to finally face the question, like, who am I really?
Yeah.
Because he's so singularly focused on, well, maybe he has a dual focus with who he's dating and achieving Xavier's goal. He needs to figure out who he is as an individual, and he questions a lot of things when you get in that Grant Morrison run, including his marriage with Jean Grey,
which is a big thing that happened to him in the 90s. We get it, but still,
right? But he questions their relationship, and he is helped down that path by Emma Frost.
God, I love her. God, I love her. She is so great in every way.
And it is an extremely important relationship that they start.
Yep.
That goes right up until his death. Like, through like the next decade and a half of Cyclops, they are attached at the hip, those two. Which
sometimes I feel was a lot of it her influence, like her psychic influence, dragging him along, which I don't think it was. I think that they both said, especially her, that, she's like, I tell him everything because he knows that I can know everything he's gonna know. Like,
Well, see, I think that they influence each other. She makes him a little bit worse. He makes her a little bit better.
and it's true. I mean, one thing he needed to work on was what she was wearing. Because let's be real.
No, I was totally fine with all of it.
Oh God,
Absolutely fine with everything.
the liquid latex. That's all it was. It was just like, oh Lord.
So you have this relationship that starts as a psychic relationship. He's cheating on his wife, which I'm not super surprising from a man like Cyclops, but she helps him confront those questions like, am I deserving of being a leader? You know, what am I without Jean Grey? Is Xavier's vision really what I also want for the future? And it helps him become his own person, and you know, he helps her from going around committing genocide
For a while. It's just, her intentions have always been her own. That's the one thing I loved about this character since day one. Her Hellfire years, like, it's about, you think she's following, when actuality, she's not. She's calling her own shots, and you might think she's letting you do everything, when in actuality, you're working for her.
And we're going to get to more about Emma in a different show.
Yeah.
But we've already touched on a lot about Cyclops throughout the 2000s and the teens. We talked a little bit about the different events and how he goes into this ultra survival mode, because things got real shitty for mutants in the new millennium. Like, real shitty.
Thank you, Michael Brian Bendis.
Right.
Yeah, hate him.
But I think he goes into survival mode, and I think mutants are at their best when things are really bad.
Well, it's because they have to be. They have to be the best that they can be, because whether or not you agree with them or you even like them, they have to survive. Whether that you like it or not, they have to survive.
Yeah.
It comes down to, like, when House of M happened, which another one of my favorite characters, the Scarlet Witch, you know, broke my heart. Oh, I threw that comic across the room when it happened because I got so angry. But it was one of those things, it's just like, now you went from having over tens and tens of millions of mutants running around. Now you have 198. So what can you do? What do you have to do? I mean, you go through that. Civil War happens, which the X-Men, minus a couple, there's 3 on the top of my head who actually participated in that. The mutants stay away. I mean, the government put sentinels to protect them surrounding the school.
Yeah. And throughout all of these events, Xavier's not really around.
No.
He's off doing his own thing. Cyclops and Emma Frost are left in charge because there aren't the other options. And it's an interesting question, and it's an interesting set of years for the X-Men, because it poses the question, what happens to Xavier's dream when Xavier is not around?
Just like every other, I mean, and just think about things that happen in real life. Like, when the person who proposes something disappears, what happens? People pervert it to their own needs.
Yeah.
And I think that's what happens. It's like, you know, Magneto tried in the 80s. He tried to follow Xavier's dream, and it didn't work for him, you know? So and Scott, who believed in this dream for so long, and now it's on his shoulders completely.
Yeah.
Is what's happening.
And I think he still did, but in order to fulfill that dream, you got to keep living.
Yes. And when 198, and he did something that was so extreme, something that you never thought he would do. He sanctioned a Black Ops team. He gave his permission and remade X-Force into that final solution. Wolverine, you and your team need to kill these people now so that they're not a problem later.
Yeah.
Like, they were preemptive, which he keeps from everybody. nobody knows that Wolverine has his own little team that goes out and does all these extreme missions. Which is interesting because now, like you said, he's evolved from being a team leader to the leader of an entire race, of an entire country, because now they're on Utopia. And when they get on Utopia, he becomes so much like a president. He's a diplomat now, which is something that the rest of the world does not really understand. But he told them during the Utopia storylines when Norman Osborn came in and started attacking them, was like, this is our own nation. We are in international waters. Leave us alone. So him having a Black Ops team, doing their stuff.
He certainly adopts this whatever it takes mentality. I just want to point out that Wolverine absolutely okay with forming a Black Ops team and going out and assassinating people, but don't involve the kids, man, because then you have a schism.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Oh my God. Schism was probably one of the recent storylines that got me really upset because I felt like the roles were really switched.
Yeah.
Like, Wolverine, look at with him and Kitty, him and Jubilee. He trained them to fight. That's what he did. If you go back to the early 80s during the Wolverine and Kitty Pryde miniseries, he trains her to be a samurai so she could fight. Even when he meets Jubilee, he doesn't train her necessarily, but he throws her into action. Look at Extinction Agenda. She's a part of that because he brought her in. It was him, Jubilee, and Psylocke together. So, which I felt really sorry for Psylocke because she had to deal with Jubilee.
Yeah, they're carrying a lot of dead weight there.
Yeah. I mean, Psylocke, hi, look at me, I just turned Japanese. I'm trying to get used to this new body.
Don't worry about it, it's a thing.
Oh, whatever. But now I have to deal with this person. God damn it. Those sunglasses are annoying.
That's what this team needs. A yellow trench coat.
Oh. No, but it's true, though. So, yeah, that's the reason why Schism really aggravates me, because, Cyclops is doing exactly what Wolverine was doing in the past. And now, all of a sudden, it's a bad thing for Wolverine. Look at me, I got a conscience.
Yeah, who cares now?
Look I care about education. I'm going to start a school. But that all being said, it's just one of those things that they don't have to, that Cyclops just really had to work on. He forms this Black Ops team. He keeps it from everybody. It wasn't until Second Coming happens where X-23 kills somebody and Nightcrawler flips the fuck out. He's just no, that is not what we do. This is not what we do. And the conversation turns to Wolverine telling everybody what happened and what's going on. And Cyclops is yeah, it happened. I had to do what I had to do.
Mm-hmm.
And from that point on, you start seeing that more. You start seeing it more of him pretty much saying, what needs to happen is going to happen because we have to survive.
Yeah. Yep. And he just that's everything is a means to an end, and the end is keep on living.
Yep.
But I think we're wrapping up here. Anything else that you want to say about Cyclops as a character now that he's dead?
Cyclops basically became Magneto, early Magneto towards the end of it. He is one of the quintessential characters that I can finally say is, you heard the saying, if you stay long enough to be a hero, you eventually become a villain.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what, in a sense, happened. Because even when you look at, A versus X, Captain America came on his lawn.
Yep.
and was like, hey, we're taking her. And he's like, no, you're not. And of course, Cyclops, being Cyclops, threw the first punch and created a whole war. He did everything to try to make the world a better place in his mind. Because let's be real, other people feel like other leaders, some of them we have today, I think they're trying to make the world a better place, but it's their own vision. And I feel like that's what happened with him. And because even after A versus X, during Brian Michael Bendis' run during of Uncanny, he's still trying to do the right thing for that, all the way up until Death of X. Once again, still trying to do the best that he could.
And I think that the comparison to Magneto is valid. I don't think that Cyclops was ever trying to push an agenda of mutant superiority.
No, he was not.
I do think he was trying to push an agenda of survival and coexistence, but
Yes.
with the assumption that this is the next step in evolution, we're just going to wait them out.
Yes, and which is what, essentially, think about it. Charles is like living in peace with each other. It's more waiting it out because they're going to die out eventually.
Yeah.
Even Cassandra Nova, during that first issue of New X-Men, was like, look at the Neanderthal, the modern man, destroy, the Cro-Magnon man. Like,
And it wasn't even with the Neanderthal, it wasn't even a matter of the Cro-Magnon man just overpowering it. It's like nature saw this is the next step, so kick in the extinction gene.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
And that's exactly what a lot of them feel like, which is why humanity got so up in arms about it.
Yep. That's why we have Sentinels.
Oh, God, Sentinels.
Here we go. We're going to talk more about Sentinels later.
All right.
But I think that's enough for this show. Next time, we're going to discuss Death of X.
Oh, yes.
And, where Cyclops finally buys the farm.